Hi guys, it's me again and welcome to another video on my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about how to revise successfully for English. English is one of those subjects where everyone seems to dread it or seems to hate it for some reason, and there's very few people that actually know that like English. To be honest with you, I didn't really like English for a lot of the time I've been at secondary school. I'm in year 11 at the moment, and throughout about year 7 to year 9, I really didn't like English at all. It wasn't very fun. But lately I've been liking English a lot more, and I feel like people aren't getting the gist of how to revise successfully for English, and I'm going to try and give you a few tips and tricks to be able to revise properly for English and to be able to get the top marks. Now, as you know, the new GCSEs are really tough in terms of English language and English literature. I'm going to be talking mainly about English literature in this video, but I can also make another video for English language if you really want. So, I think one of the main downfalls of people when they try to revise for English literature is that they try to revise things that aren't really as important in hitting the marks for the exams. For example, I do AQA, so in AQA we have our mark scheme is based on 3 AOs mainly in English literature. AO1, which talks about interpretations and concepts and also includes quotation, textual references such as quotations. We also have AO2, which includes methods, writer's methods, analysis of methods, and analysis of structure and form as well. And we also talk about AO3, which is contextual references. So, for example, what was going on during the time that the writer wrote it, what influences did the writer have, etc., etc. So one thing I think that really confuses people about English in terms of its revision and in terms of its techniques for revising is that many people focus way too much on AO1. If you take AQA for example, AO1 is about 40% of your marks, so you get marked out of 30 for each section that you do for each essay. So for example, let's say we're looking at Romeo and Juliet. You'll do an essay on Romeo and Juliet which is marked out of 30. Now 40% of that, or 12 marks, is going to be for AO1. Another 12 marks, or another 40%, is going to be for AO2, and then the last 6 marks are going to be for AO3. The main downfall that I see that people have is that people focus way too much on either AO1 or AO2. Now, clearly, because they're 40%, you need to have a balance of the two, and I think way too many people focus on just one of those and don't really embed both of them well into their essays. So, for example, I'm going to talk mainly about poetry in this video. I wrote an essay to my teacher about the two poems My Last Duchess by Robert Browning and Ozymandias by Percy B. Shelley. And again, I'm looking back at my AOs, and I found that when I had finished writing this essay, I focused way too much on AO1, and I didn't add enough of AO3. So how it works in AQA is that, especially for poetry, is that you have to compare two poems and how the writer portrays a certain theme of the poem. So for this essay I did, the question was, how does Browning present power in My Last Duchess in comparison to another poem? I chose Ozymandias. So I was talking about the interpretations of power in both poems really well. Like, my teacher loved my interpretations of power. I was talking about possessive power versus power of the people, like political power, versus like metaphorical power or the power of nature. But I think my essay was lacking in contextual references and textual references as well. So for example, when I was talking about the Duke in My Last Duchess, I could have had more textual references and then linked it back to the context and why Browning would have written that in terms of the context of when he was writing and what issues he was trying to address in society at the time. So to sum up, my first tip is people need to have a balance of the AOs. When you're analysing a poem or a book or a play, you want to have your revision plan set out as, let me focus on AO1, then I can focus on AO2, and then I can focus on AO3 in the right balance. You don't want to have too much weighting on one of the AOs because you're getting marks for all three of them. The second tip I'm going to give you is about mainly AOT, but analysis. Now, most people would analyze language. Language is fairly simple to analyze. If you have a quote we can take from Ozymandias, we have King of Kings. King of Kings is quite an easy quotation to analyze. You can talk about the superlative, you can talk about the religious imagery, etc., etc. But people don't really talk much about structure and form. Now, structure and form are actually seen as a higher level skill in terms of what examiners are marking, because everyone can analyze language. Like I just said for that quote, pretty much anyone could talk about language in those quotations, but examiners are more wowed, if you want to take it as that, by structural and form points that link back to your analysis of language. So if we link my quotation, King of Kings, back to Ozymandias, that's a language point, but we could look at the structure. So that quotation, the whole line of that quotation is, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. The fact that he says King of Kings at the end of the sentence, we can make a point about that. Or the fact that the form of the poem itself is sonnet form. Sonnets are mainly about love, yet we talk about power in this poem, so you can make a contrasting point between those two. To sum up my second point, we don't want to focus too much on language, but we want to focus on language, structure, and form, because you get marked on all three of those which is encompassed by AOT. Now lastly, I'm going to talk about contextual references and how we can embed those properly into our essays. Now, I found that the biggest mistake that loads of people have with contextual references is that they bolt it on right at the end of their essay because they have nothing else to say about it, and they don't embed it into their points well. So I had this as a main issue in when I was studying, not when I was, I had this as a main issue in my Jekyll and Hyde essays, because my contextual references were about Victorian society, Victorian gentlemen, psychological studies during the time, and I didn't really embed that well into my essays. So, for example, I would be talking about the duality of Jekyll and Hyde as the two personalities in the same body, and then at the end of my essay I would just bolt on, oh yeah, there was. So the main issue I had with that was I wasn't using my contextual factors to actually back up the point I was making. So another good way I think that my teacher taught me is that when you have a point, or when you're planning your essay before you even write it, you should make sure that your contextual references agree with your point. So, to give an example, if you're writing an essay about whatever book it may be, I'm going to use Jekyll and Hyde because that's what I'm studying. If I'm writing an essay about Jekyll and Hyde, and my question is on the duality of Jekyll and Hyde, what contextual factors do I know that back up my point about duality? So, I might know that there was very controversial psychological studies about duality and multiple personality disorder and schizophrenia, whatever. I can back that up by saying that this might have troubled Jekyll because so and so, and link that back to how science at the time was quite controversial. Then I can lead that back onto the contextual reference of religion versus science, and how the science that, Jekyll being quite a crazy scientist, doing unheard of experiments, might contrast or go against what we know as religion. I can then link that back to a quotation about, for example, at the beginning of the book where it says Cain's heresy. There's a quite oxymoronic vibe to that quotation. So, yeah, that's how you can add context to your work. To sum up that topic, or that piece of advice, I would say that make sure that the contextual factors you're looking for are relevant to your topic, and then make sure that you embed your quotation, not your quotations, you embed your contextual references to back up your point and not just to bolt it on the end. Because if your contextual references aren't relevant to what the examiner wants, then it's pretty much useless in the essay. So those are my tips and tricks to do well in English literature. I hope this video was helpful to you. If you've watched some of my other videos, click the like button, subscribe, and comment down below with any other tips and tricks that you find are useful in English literature. We're part of a community here, so we should all help each other out, because these new exams are hard. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you all later.